Hey, how's it going guys? My name is Dom and today I'm going to be showing you how to build a time picker using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Okay, so this solution today is going to require no external libraries or framework. We're going to be doing it all using vanilla JavaScript. Okay, so right here we have the time picker. So if I was to click on this input field, we can see we get this custom time picker. So I can go inside here and I can say, for example, something like 7:50 p.m. and it's going to update the input field right there. Okay, so of course you can also change the AM and the hour. So all this right here is relatively straightforward to do. Also keep in mind that it's going to require a little bit of JavaScript knowledge. So if you're an absolute beginner, you may find it a little bit difficult to understand some of this video, but if you got some experience, the code should be okay for you to understand. Okay, so going inside this tab right here, let's begin from scratch to create what I just showed you. Also keep in mind that the source code for today's video is going to be linked down below if you want to download and follow along. So going inside the text editor right here, we can see I have this input field with a type of text. Okay, so we're going to be using this input field to test our time picker. I've also got a class here of time pickable. So basically, you're going to want to add this to your own input fields as well. And basically, whenever a class has time pickable, it just means that when we actually write the code for the time picker, it's going to look for this class and it's going to apply and allow the time picker to work on basically any input fields with this class. It's also important that you make these input fields read only. Now obviously it's going to be up to you, but if you want your user to only be able to enter in values using the custom time picker, have read only on your input field. Okay, so first off I'm going to be showing you the HTML and the CSS for the custom time picker before moving on to the JavaScript. Alright, so going up inside here, let's create a new style tag. Okay, then dropping down here, we're going to be basically creating the HTML for the custom time picker. So it's going to be represented using a div with a class of time-picker. Okay, now also keep in mind that all of this HTML right here, which we're going to be writing, is actually going to be generated using JavaScript a bit later on. So this is just here for now, so we can actually see what CSS is going to be applied. So inside the time picker container, we can have a select dropdown with a class of time-picker__select. Okay, now we can quite easily remove the name and ID. We're not going to be needing those two. Hopping inside this select, we're basically just going to have a bunch of options. So we can say right here an option with a value of 0, 1 and the actual display as 0, 1 also. So this first select here is going to be the hour dropdown. Okay, now you're going to want to basically duplicate these options all the way down to 12 if you want to, but honestly it's probably not necessary because we're only going to be styling up what it looks like, and we don't care about what's inside of it at this point in time. So you know what, I might actually just remove both of these and just have the singular option just so we can see what it looks like. Let's do the exact same thing down below. This time it's going to be for the minutes, so we're going to begin the minutes at 05 or 5 minutes inside an hour. It's also important that we add a colon here just to say, the hour : minute. Okay, then dropping down we can have a third select, and this one here is going to be AM or PM. So quite simply PM and then AM then PM, just like that. So if I save this right here, go inside the browser, we're going to have something like this. So now let's use some CSS to make this right here look like what I showed you in the example. Okay, cool. So going inside the CSS, we can begin this by targeting the time-picker class. So the first thing to do here is going to be to make this a position of absolute. Now this right here is not going to do anything, right now, but it's going to be put in use when we get to the JavaScript later on. Basically, we're going to be using the position of absolute to move the time picker so it appears under the targeted input field. Okay. We can also display this right here as an inline block. This is going to ensure that we don't have the time picker spanning the entire width of the browser. We can give this a padding of 10px, a background of a light gray, and a border radius of 6 pixels just for some rounded corners. If I save this, go back in the browser, we're going to get something like this. As we can see, the time picker is appearing right next to the input field. Now, of course, this is going to change later on when we get to the JavaScript, because like I said earlier, we're going to be positioning it just below the input field when the user clicks on the input field. Okay. Moving on now to styling up the select drop downs, we can go back inside here and we can just say time-picker on the next line here. Time picker __ select. So when it comes to the select drop downs, firstly, I just want to remove all of the default browser styling. In order to achieve this, we can use the -WebKit appearance and we can just say none right here. So WebKit appearance set to none. Then we can do the same thing, this time saying Moz appearance. Then lastly, we can say appearance and then make this none. So essentially right here, with these three properties, we're covering most of the common web browsers in order to remove the default styling of the select dropdowns, which means if I go back in the browser, you can see now, of course, it looks a bit different without the drop down arrow on the right. Okay. Going back inside here, we can also apply an outline of none just to remove the outline when the user clicks on the drop down. This is optional and you could argue that you want to keep it in, but it's up to you guys. You can also, you can always add an extra border later on to give the user some feedback that they're actually, choosing a drop down field. Dropping down, we can give a text align of center and a border of 1 pixel, then solid. Then we can say a light gray being $DDD. We can give this a padding of 6 pixels top and bottom, and then 10 pixels left and right. We can also add a border radius here of 6 pixels, just like the parent container. Okay. And we can also, let's just go back inside here and just check our progress. So we can see it looks like this currently. So lastly, I just want to change the background and ensure that it is going to be in fact white in all scenarios, and give it a new font and a cursor. So going back inside here, let's apply a background of white. As we can see by default, the browser is going to make it white, but just to make sure, we're going to set it explicitly right down here. Let's give this a cursor of pointer as well as a font family here of Hebo and then sans serif. So of course, guys, you can pick whatever font you want inside here. If I go back in the browser, we now have it looking something like this. So we are now done with the CSS. Okay, so now let's have a chat about the JavaScript. So the way the JavaScript is going to work is basically we're going to allow the JavaScript to generate a time picker whenever the user brings focus onto one of the input fields. Okay, and then of course they can choose their time. Then once they've chosen their time and they've clicked away from the time picker, we're going to basically remove all this HTML and go back to the way the input field would normally be. So how is this going to work exactly? Well, going inside the sidebar here, let's make a new file called main.js. So this JavaScript file right here is going to be sort of like your main controller for your application. So I'm sure you guys have one of these already in your page. If you don't, you can create one right now, but it's important that when you are importing this this file, let's just go back inside here. So if I was to import it right now, just make sure you have, if I go main.js, make sure you have a type of module. Okay, so this right here is going to allow us to make use of the ES6 import-export syntax. Okay, so speaking of that, from inside this main.js, we're going to be importing a bunch of code which handles the time picker and makes it work. This is going to be stored in an external JavaScript file. So let's make a new file here called timepicker.js, and inside here, this is where all of our code for the time picker is going to be stored. Okay. Now, how do we import this file into this main.js? Well, we can say right up here, import all as time picker from then /timepicker.js. So now, once we actually get to writing some code inside here, we can access it using time picker inside this main.js file. Okay, so we're going to be getting to this a bit later on, but for now, you can just include this first line here to import the code from the timepicker.js. So now we're basically all set up in that the main.js is included inside the HTML, so we can now begin working the JavaScript and get everything working. Okay, so what is the first step for the JavaScript code? Well, going inside the time picker, we're going to be writing a function here. Actually, we're going to be writing plenty of functions here. So let's begin with the most basic functions, and these are going to be 4 functions. So we can say, first off, function get time parts from pickable. Okay, so this function is going to take in a time pickable. So remember, when I said time pickable earlier, I'm referring to this input field right up here. So basically, you're going to pass in an input field into this function, and then it's going to return you the time parts for whatever value is inside that function. Sorry, inside that input field. Okay, so if I drop right down here, and I can say const example time pickable is going to be equal to document.querySelector, and pass through here a class of time pickable. So basically, example time pickable is going to refer to this input field right up here. So if I was to now say console.log example time pickable, actually, my mistake, it needs to be get time parts from pickable, pass through here the example time pickable, I now expect this to give me a bunch of values. I want the hour to be, for example, something like, let's just do 12, okay? I want the minutes to be 45, and I want the meridian value to be PM. So basically, I want 12:45 PM from the input field, which means if I go back inside here and I give this input field the value of 12:45 PM, I expect this function to give me 12:45 PM. I hope that made sense, but if I go in the browser now and go inside the console, we can see, of course, we get hour, minute, and meridian of 12:45 PM. So basically, we need to write a function which takes this value and then gives us everything inside here. Okay? I may have actually taken a bit of time to explain that. I apologize, but I hope that makes sense now. But how are we going to go about getting this string and then converting it into an object like this so we can use it in the JavaScript code? A better question is, why are we doing this? Well, let me answer that first. The reason why we need to extract the time string into this object right here is so that when I click on the input field right here, I want the current value of that to be represented inside my time picker. So this time picker needs to know each individual part of the existing value inside here. So let's do that right now. Okay, so going inside this function right up here, the first step is going to be to actually write some regex. So we're going to use regex in order to achieve this. So we're going to say const pattern. So const pattern is going to be equal to something like this. So let's just put a simple time string for reference. So if I say 12:45 PM right up here, it's going to have a couple of parts. So we're going to mark the beginning of the string here, then the end of the string, okay? Then we're going to say inside this capture group, we're going to say any digit. So basically one or more digits we're going to try and find. Then we're going to say colon to find our, or match on our colon there. Then providing more digits. So once again, \d plus for any number of digits. And the reason why we're using, of course, these groupings is so we can actually extract those values once it has been, searched for. Then put a space to represent our space right here. Then we can say inside here either AM or PM, okay? And that is our regular expression, or sorry, that is our pattern for, of course, finding those individual parts from the time string. So how do we now extract those? Very straightforward. If I drop down here, we can just say const. Then we're going to say hour, minutes, and then meridian inside square brackets here. So we're going to be using what's called array destructuring here. It's going to be equal to now array.from, then use time pickable dot value dot match, okay, then pass through here the pattern. So what's happening right here? In order to explain this, I'm just going to remove the array destructuring here and just replace it with what's happening right here? Let's remove this and replace it with results. Okay, so what is array from time pickable dot value dot match, then pass through here the pattern. What does this match method give us on the time pickable value? Well, let's console.log the results in order to find out. Save this, go back in the browser, and we can see we get this right here. So basically, by using the regular expression, it has found a match, and it's given us each one of those separate parts that were inside the brackets here. It's extracted them into these array elements. So at array element 1 we have 12, then we have 2 at 45, then 3 says PM. Okay, that of course comes from this right here. So this first value we don't want. We don't care about the whole thing. We only want 1, 2, and 3. So going back inside here, we're going to say dot splice, then pass through 1. This right here is going to remove everything. Sorry, it's going to remove the first value from the array, leaving us with those 3. Back in the browser, we now only have the 3 right here. Then, if I go back inside here and put back the array destructuring, hour is going to be the value inside the array at index 0, minutes at index 1, and of course meridian at index 3. So we have those 3 values extracted, which means now we can simply just say hour, then we can say, then we can say minutes, then we can say meridian. So basically, it's just saying hour is equal to the hour, minutes equal to the minutes, meridian equal to the meridian. So now if I save this and go back in the browser, for our console log down here, we can see we get 12:45 PM. Now of course, if I go inside the HTML and make this value something like 10, let's just do 10:28 AM, save this and go back in the browser, we get 10:28 AM inside here. So we made the progress right there, and we've actually extracted or converted a time string into those separate values. Alright, cool. So now we have this function complete. The next one is going to be to essentially, we're going to be grabbing our time picker right here and then getting each one of our drop downs. Okay, so it's going to work in a very similar fashion. We're going to be returning the hour, meridian, and minutes this time for the actual drop downs themselves. So I'm going to say right down here, function get selects from picker. This one here is going to take through a time picker. Okay, so now also keep in mind, guys, before I continue, obviously all of these functions here are going to have some sort of use when it comes to the main core code for the time picker, so bear with me as we get through each one of these functions. Cool, so we got this get selects from picker. This one here takes through a time picker, not a time pickable. Okay, so a time picker refers to the whole div right here with a class of time picker. So let's get an example time picker. Okay, this time grabbing our time picker class, and let's log out the result of get selects from time picker passing through the example time picker. So for this one, once again using a very similar method of array destructuring, we can just say const hour, then minute, then meridian is equal to time picker dot query selector all, then pass through here the time picker underscore select class. So I'm sure many of you guys are used to or are familiar with the query selector all method. Basically, it's going to give you an array like structure containing every single select dropdown inside the provided time picker. So of course here we're going to get index 0, the hour dropdown, the minute dropdown, then the meridian dropdown. So if I was to return right down here, we can just say hour, minute, and then meridian once again. Save this, go back in the browser, and we can see in the console we have all these three properties here: hour, meridian, and minutes, referring to every single select dropdown. So of course we're going to be using this function here to extract the values from each dropdown when the user chooses one. Okay, so that is the second function complete. The next one is going to be called function get time string from picker. Okay, so this function is going to use directly the previous function which we just wrote, and it's also going to take through a time picker. So as the name suggests, this one here is a bit of a reverse from the first one, or it's a little bit similar, where essentially we're getting a time string from an existing picker. Okay, so if I was to pass through right down here, so if I say get time string from picker, pass through the picker once again, by default, as we can see, it's 1:05 a.m. So I just want to get basically 01:05 a.m. inside the console when using that function. Okay, so going back inside the JavaScript, it's going to be relatively straightforward. We can just say const selects is equal to get selects from picker. It's going to pass through here the time picker, and we can just return here using the JavaScript template strings, the backticks near the 1 on the keyboard, and we can now make use of template literals, which means I can just say $, then curly braces, and put an expression through here. I can just say selects.hour.value, then say colon, then I can just say selects.minutes.value. Remember, this selects.hour refers to the hour dropdown. Same goes for the minute dropdown right here, and we're just getting its value. Okay? Then we can just say space and do the exact same thing for the selects, then meridian, then dot value. So now if I save this, go back in the browser, we get 1:05 a.m. in the console when making use of that get time string from picker function. Okay, so we're very close to completing all of the essential basic functions. The last one here is going to be called function number to option. Okay, so this right here is going to take through a standard number, and it's going to be giving us an option element for that number. So what do I mean by option element? Well, I'm basically referring to one of these right here. So if I was to pass in 5 into that function, I want this string given back to me, 05, then 05. Okay, so inside here, we're going to say const padded is equal to number.toString.pad start, then 2, and then 0. So what is this line of code doing? Well, basically, this number could be something like 5. Okay, we're saying let's get 5, then convert it to a string. Okay, then we're going to say let's pad the start of that number and essentially put a 0 in front of the 5 if it's a single digit. So if I go in the browser right here, I want to show you what it does. So if I pass through 2, then I say toString, then I say pad start 2, and then 0, we get 0, 2. If I was to pass in 12, we still get 1, 2, we don't get 0, 1, 2. So basically this pad start is going to ensure that your string length is at least 2, and fill the remaining, or pad the remaining, with 0. Okay, cool. So we've got our padded number. We can now just simply say return. Once again, using the template strings, we can just say option value. Then we can pass through the value here, and this will of course be the padded value. Okay, then we can just put it inside the actual option display text as well. Okay, save this and let's test it. Okay, so let's just call console log number to option, pass through here 4. Okay, save this back in the browser, and we get the option here with a value of 4, and then of course 4. So that's working perfectly fine. So we are basically done with all of the basic functions inside the JavaScript. So now we can move on to actually writing some of the core logic for this custom time picker. So the first one of these functions is going to be the function which is going to build the picker in the JavaScript. Okay, so for now, we can keep the example time pickable, but remove the example time picker because it's going to be generated using JavaScript instead. So this means if I go back in the HTML, we can now just safely either remove or comment out this code for the time picker. Okay, cool. So now we're basically left with this right here in the browser. I might just actually, you know what, actually forget that. I was going to remove the value here, but let's just keep it and make sure it works when we click on the time picker. So how do we build the time picker? Well, let's make a function right up here called build picker. Okay, so we're going to be building this new time picker based on a time pickable input field. We can say here time pickable. Okay, cool. So what's going to happen inside here? Well, we need to actually create a new HTML element. So we can say const picker is equal to document.createElement and pass through here the div. Okay, then we can just say return the picker. So the ultimate goal of this function is going to be to return the picker which we have created. Okay, now what are the steps in building up the time picker? Well, of course, we need to add in those select drop downs for the hour, the minute, and the meridian. So let's go down here and we're going to say const hour options equal to an array of our hours. So the available hours to the user is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, then 12. Okay. Then we're going to say .map and pass through here the function of number to option. So we're going to get every single number inside here, and we're going to use map to apply the number to option function. Basically now the hours options constant is an array of HTML option strings. Okay, so let's just prove this real quick by saying console.log hour options. Okay, then down here we can just say build picker, then pass through here the example time pickable. Save this, go inside the browser, we can see that in the console, through that console.log, we have our options for the hours. Let's do the exact same thing this time for the minutes. So down here we can say minutes options, and for the minutes I'm just going to copy and paste this from my code reference. So I'll copy this right here, oops, and I'm just going to be doing here basically 0, 5, 10, 15, etc., incrementing by 5. So we have now the minutes options as our option, HTML string as well. So what are the other parts to create our time picker? Well, we're going to say right up here, picker.classList.add. We can add the class of time picker to the created HTML div right up here. Okay, then we can actually write out the HTML. So we can say picker.innerHTML is going to be equal to, and once again using the JavaScript template strings, we can make use of a multi-line string here. So we're going to have our three selects. We can say select with a class of time-picker__select. Inside the first select dropdown, as we can see from the example from earlier, it's going to be for the hours. So let's inject our option HTML strings into this select. We can use the curly braces here. We can say our options.join with an empty string. So basically, we're just joining up every single option string, giving us essentially each option in the select. Then we can say colon and do the exact same thing for the minutes. So up here, we can just say minutes options.join with an empty string. And then lastly, we can make the third drop down. Of course, this one here is just going to be the AM and PM, so we can quite easily just say option value for AM. Okay, and we can just do the exact same thing here for the PM, just like that. So now we have essentially all of this stuff for the picker, and we can see here we're now also returning the picker. So if I was to just say inside here console.log the results of the build picker function, save this, go back in the browser, we get the div right here, and we can see it's working okay. So we have all of the HTML for the picker complete. So it's a bit difficult to understand or see this right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually append this picker object, which we just created, to the HTML document. So we're going to say right down here, document.body.append child. Let's append that picker which we just created. Save this back in the browser, and we get the picker right there. And this, of course, was generated using the JavaScript. Okay, so that's working perfectly fine. And we have all of our different options here for the minutes, the hours, and the AM or PM, which means we can now go back in the HTML. We can now just simply remove all of the reference code for the dropdown, and it is all nice and clean. So what is the next step inside the build picker function? Well, as I demonstrated earlier, we want this 10:28 PM to appear inside here when the user first opens up the custom picker. So we can achieve this by going back inside our function here. We can drop down and we can just say const selects is equal to get selects from picker, then pass in our new picker. So we're going to use our function from earlier to grab every single select drop down from the newly created picker. Then drop down here, I'm going to say if the time pickable input field actually has a value, okay, then we're going to go inside here. We're going to say const hour, minutes, and meridian is equal to get time parts from pickable. Then pass through here the time pickable. So remember, the get time parts from pickable is going to take the input field right here. It's going to grab the 10:28 AM and give us each hour, minute, and meridian from that, from that input field. Also, we're using object destructuring here in JavaScript to simply grab the hour property from the returned object here and putting it inside the hour variable. Okay, so if you're not too familiar with this syntax, it's the same as just saying something like this, result, then saying result.hour to refer to the hour. In this case, it's just hour, like that. So a little bit cleaner. So we have the hour, minutes, and meridian as constants. So now it's going to be relatively straightforward. We can just set the value for each one of our drop-down fields. We can say selects.hour.value is equal to hour, and do the exact same thing for the minutes and the meridian. Go inside here, minutes, minutes, and then meridian, just like that. Also, I forgot to mention, meridian refers to AM or PM. Okay, so that's just a fun fact for you. But anyway, let's go inside the browser here, and we can click, or we can see this, and we have a bit of a problem. So of course 1028 isn't, or 28 should I say, isn't an option inside the drop down menu. So this right here might be an argument as to why you don't want your users to enter a custom value inside here, and you want to make use of the read only attribute here. So just to simplify this solution, I'm going to make this 10:25 a.m. because we know that 25 is an option for us. Go back in the browser, we can see we get 10:25 a.m. selected, when I create a picker from our time pickable input field. Okay, cool. So now, how do we get this input field to update its value when I choose a time here? For example, if I say 4, I want this to now say 4:25 a.m. So this is very straightforward. Let's go back inside the JavaScript code, and right above here, we're just going to say selects.hour.addEventListener, okay, change. So basically, whenever the user picks a new hour from the select dropdown, okay, we're going to run this function. This function is going to say timePickable.value is equal to get time string from the picker. Then you simply pass in your picker. So we're getting the time string from the newly created picker whenever the user changes the hour. And we can simply do the exact same thing for the minutes dropdown. Then lastly, of course, the meridian dropdown. Save this back in the browser. If I choose 2, we get 2:25 a.m. right there, and this comes from our custom function which creates a time string from the time picker. 2:10 it works, 2:10 p.m. and we can see it works. So now, we've actually completed a lot of the code for this solution right here. The last step really is going to be to make this work, when the page first loads up, and of course make it work when the user actually clicks on the input field. So this sort of comes into play, we can go about doing this using a new function, of course. So going back inside the JavaScript, let's now, let's keep these two lines, okay? But we're going to be saying show instead of build picker. So we're going to be calling this show function, which is yet to exist, passing through the example time pickable. So if I go up right here, then I just say function show, then take through the time pickable. So we're taking through the time pickable. The first step is going to be to say const picker equal to then build picker, then of course pass through the time pickable. So we're just once again building a time picker using our reference input field. Then we're going to want to know where to position the time picker. Obviously, we're going to want it to appear underneath our input field. So to achieve that, we need to get the bounds of the input field. So what do I mean by the bounds? Well, if I say right down here console.log timePickable.getBounding client rect. So if I call this getBounding client rect function, save this, go back in the browser, we get nothing. Let's try and figure out why. Actually, we get an error, but this is what we're actually interested in right up here. So this is the result of the getBounding client rect function. We basically just get the surrounding positions and values of the input field. So this bottom right here is very important. This just means that the bottom of the input field right down here is 29 pixels from the top of the page, or the visible viewport. Okay, same goes for the left. This time picker is 8 pixels from the left. So now we can simply use the bottom and the left properties of the input field to position the actual custom time picker when the user clicks on the input field. So we can do that by going back inside here, and we can just say const, once again using object destructuring here, we can say bottom, then say colon top, then left. Okay, so this right here is going to be equal to time pickable.get bounding client rect. So essentially, this bottom refers to the 29 pixels, and we're just saying let's call this bottom property top instead of bottom. It's just a rename. Okay, then say left to grab the left value. So now down here I can say picker.style.top is equal to, then once again using the template strings here, we can pass through top, then do px. Of course, remember, top here refers to 29. We're saying 29 pixels, okay? Then the exact same thing for the left, this time saying left px. Remember also that we're using the position of absolute, which means we can actually make use of the top and left properties here in the CSS styles for the picker. Okay, then lastly we can just say document.body.append child and append the picker to the document body. So this is just basically automating what I showed you earlier on the bottom of this document. Okay, we can now just return the picker just for convenience, and we're going to be using this return very shortly. So if I save this right here, and I now just say right down here, show the time picker for the example time pickable input field. Go back in the browser, and we can see we get 10:25 AM presented right underneath the input field right there. So this is basically what's going to happen when the user clicks on the input field. So speaking of that, let's finish this code off with the last function here. So going inside the time picker JS file once again, let's say this right here. We're going to say function activate. Okay, so the activate function right inside here is going to basically, like the name suggests, activate the time picker for the page. Okay, so it's going to make it so whenever you click on an input field with the time pickable class, it's going to actually make it work. So the first thing to do inside here is actually going to be to add or inject that CSS from earlier on. So we're going to clean up this code even more so that we don't even need to have this CSS inside the HTML head when the page first loads up. So we're going to say right inside here, document.head.insert adjacent HTML, and we can just say before end here. So basically this just means insert some HTML before the end of the head document. Okay, using the multi-line strings here, just going to pass down now the tag right here, the style tag. Okay, so basically the JavaScript is going to be inserting the style tag if we pass it inside here, just like this. Okay, there we go. So now if I go right down here, then I just call the the activate method or function, save this, go back in the browser, we can see that if I was to inspect the elements here, we get in the head the style tag injected using the JavaScript. So this is just so, like I said earlier, just so we don't have to include those styles inside the index HTML. Okay, so let's move on to the next part of this activate function. That is going to be to basically loop through every single input field with a class of time pickable and activate the time picker. We can say document.querySelectorAll, then pass through here the time-pickable just like this. Then we can say for every single time pickable input field, we can just go onto it just like that, and we can run this function. So inside this function, for every single time pickable input field, we're going to begin by declaring a variable called activePicker is equal to null. So this activePicker is going to eventually store the currently active picker element for this time pickable input field. Okay, so we're going to be using this to essentially let us know if there is an active picker on the actual input field. So it's going to make sense very shortly. Let's just drop down here, and we're going to say time pickable.addEventListener, listen for the focus event. Remember, this time pickable object here refers to the input field itself. So basically, whenever the user brings focus to the input field, either by clicking or tabbing into it, we're going to run this function. So first off, let's check. We're going to say, if there already is an active picker on the input field, we can just return. This is going to ensure that if you were to double click or just click on the input field again, when the picker already is showing, then we're not going to get a second picker showing. Okay, so we're just basically saying only one custom picker at a time. Okay, then we can say active picker is equal to, then show the time pickable just like that. Okay, so now if I save this, go back in the browser, then I focus on the input field, we get the time pickable showing right there. We can of course use it, go inside here, 10:40 AM, it's going to work. But if I was to now click away, nothing happens. The picker stays there. So the user can't actually remove the input field, remove the time picker. So how do we, allow the user to move on with the next input field? Well, back inside here, we can declare a new function here. We can say const on click away equal to an arrow function. So we're just going to pass through here the target. So I'm going to explain this in a sec, but we're once again just using the object destructuring here. So this on click away is going to run when the user essentially clicks anywhere on the document. Then this right here is going to take through your standard event object, but once again using object destructuring, we're only getting the target property of that event object, because we're going to need this later on. So let's keep that right there. But then inside this on click away, we need to check a few things. But first, I just want to actually console.log the target. Okay, then actually activate this on click away function. We can say document.addEventListener, and we can just say mouse down. So remember, we're using the document here, which means when the user presses the mouse anywhere on the document, it's going to run this function. So we can just say on click away. Okay, save this back in the browser. If I was to click on the input field, then click anywhere on the document, we get the HTML here for clicking on the document. If I was to click on the input field, we get the input field here as the target. If I click on the time picker, we get the time picker as the target, and so on. Okay, so basically, we're going to want the time picker to disappear when the user clicks anywhere but the input field or the time picker. How do we do that? Well, of course, we have access to what element was clicked on. So if I go inside here, we can say if, then we can say if the target is equal to the active picker. So if the user is clicking on the active picker, being the time picker, then we can just simply return, don't do anything. Also, if the user is clicking on the time pickable input field, we're going to do nothing and we're going to return. The last one's going to be, or if the active picker dot contains the target, and this right here basically just checks if the user is clicking on one of the select drop downs basically. So if the select drop down is a child element of the active picker, then we're going to return. Okay, so we can just say console.log remove picker just to test it out. Save this back in the browser. We get remove picker. If I was to click away, there we go. If I was to click on the input field, we get nothing. Click on this, we get nothing, 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 nothing. Click away and we get 9. So we have this code working perfectly fine. The last step here is going to be to simply clean up and remove the picker. So the first step is going to be to say document.remove event listener. We're going to remove this listener right down here. So we can just say mouse down, then pass through the on click away, just to ensure that we don't waste resources by having this clicker always on. Okay, sorry, this handler and this listener always on. We can then say document.body.remove child. Let's remove that active picker from the DOM. Okay, then we can just say active picker is equal to null for this specific input field. And we are done with this function. In fact, we're actually done with this entire file. Almost. Okay, so now save this back in the browser. Click on the input field. Click away. It goes away. Again, then it goes away. Change the value, click away, and it goes away. So that's working perfectly fine. So to wrap this code up, if I go back inside here, we can simply remove the last line for the activate. We're going to be calling this inside the main.js instead. So remove this, then we're going to say right up here, we're going to export the activate function. So whenever a different file wants to make use of this time picker, it's only going to be able to access the activate function, and that is what the export is doing here. So now, if I go inside the main.js, I can now say time picker dot, and we have access to the single activate function right there. So press this and I can call it, and we are done. Save this back in the browser, click on the input field, and it works right there. Let's give it one final test here, and we can create 2 input fields, just like this. Let's remove the default values just to make it a little bit easier to understand or see here. And we can test if this thing works for 2 individual input fields. Click on this one and it works fine. Make this 1:15 AM. There we go. This one, exact same thing. Let's make it 9:50 PM. And it's all working perfectly fine. So that right there is how to create a custom time picker using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. If today's video helped you out, drop a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.